to your allies. Make sure that you don't abandon the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Israelis, in the quest or hope that maybe you'll be able to change Iran.
Stick with your allies. Current Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz on this program yesterday, detailing what he would tell our president should the commander-in-chief call him for advice on how to deal with Iran. Welcome into America's Forum for a Wednesday. Many have argued that negotiating with Iran is a mistake, because they believe Iran is at the root of many problems in the Middle East, and that has what could be some interesting alliances afoot. For more on this developing story, let's again welcome in Olga Villaverde in our Newsmax TV newsroom, and we are pleased to be joined by Colonel Derek Harvey, a former intelligence officer and former advisor to General David Petraeus. Colonel Harvey, as always, we thank you for Skyping in from Tampa. And let's begin with the apparent lack of an ending to the nuclear talks, the extension for a creative framework. Is this a good decision?
Well, I think it's the only decision that the administration and the participants in the talks could go with, because I think there's still more to follow. The disagreements, I think, are fundamental in some areas. The French have pushed back hard on a couple of points. So I think that given stopping the talks or moving forward, they want to keep this game going forward.
And Colonel, can you briefly explain to us the scope of Iran's reach in the Middle East, please?
Well, they have been effectively reaching all the way from Lebanon, the Mediterranean, down into Gaza with their proxies in those areas, around the southern parts of the Arabian Peninsula into Yemen, and even somewhat into the Horn of Africa. They've been sowing disorder and supporting their proxies, militias, and other groups in those areas, terrorist groups, in order to create an advancement for their agenda in those areas.
Colonel, this outreach, this curious kind of outreach by Iran, has resulted in perhaps the formation of interesting alliances. Just yesterday, David Rubin, former mayor of Shiloh, Israel, joined us from Newsmax, New York, and he says Israel and Saudi Arabia may be working together. Take a listen, and then we'd like to get your reaction.
There have been secret consultations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and I believe that there would be secret cooperation between Israel and Saudi Arabia. There doesn't seem to be a question. They are as against or more against the Iranian nuclear program than Israel is.
Colonel, could this ever develop into a full-blown, open, and public military alliance?
No, it will not become a public and open military alliance. There is too much residual public distrust and anger in the Saudi Arabian population to do that. So the Saudi monarchy has to be sensitive. But the secret part of the relationship will go forward. It will get stronger. I think he was absolutely correct. They will work in intelligence, they'll work on planning, they will work on overflights and military cooperation in a number of areas. This is to be expected.
Colonel, let me ask you this. Another area is in Iraq, where Iranian advisors and forces are helping Iraqi forces push back on ISIS and have helped them retake the city of Tikrit, obviously. Another strange coalition with underlying differences, would you say?
Absolutely correct. We have Shia militias that are advocating the return of Khomeiniism, advancing Khomeiniism from the supreme leader, Khamenei, and the revolutionary agenda of Tehran. They are trying to spread this idea across the region, and they're empowered in Iraq in a way that they have not been heretofore.
And with a minute remaining, Colonel, we have kind of an interesting paradox. It seems that in Yemen, we're concerned about the Iranians working with the Houthis. Meantime, with Iran inside Iraq, there are some who have suggested we've been giving them a form of air support and military support. Is that paradox apparent? Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I agree with that assessment. And our support to the Iraqi government has been providing tactical air support to the militias. We can deny it. We say there's no coordination. I think if you read closely the text of transcripts of some of our senior leaders, it's clear that there's a level of coordination going on with Soleimani, the head of the Iranian Quds Force, and others.
Well, with that paradox at work, one effort supporting Iran in Iraq, the other opposing Iraq in Yemen, there is obviously more to unpack, more to discuss about American foreign policy when it comes to the Middle East. That's why we're so pleased that Colonel Harvey will stay with us, and we'll talk more about those emerging issues when America's Forum continues here on Newsmax TV.
He has to immediately say, this is what we want, and if he doesn't get it, he's got to walk. You know, this is not a deal. For months and months, I've been hearing you and everybody else talking about this deal. It's not a deal that should take so long. You could do a deal in one day if they wanted to. Remember this, the Iranians and the Persians generally are great negotiators. We are terrible negotiators. The people representing the Obama administration and Obama himself are terrible negotiators.
Someone who knows a little something about negotiating, Donald Trump, author of the book The Art of the Deal and potential presidential candidate, on Fox News last night, saying the U.S. should simply tell the Iranians this is what we want, and if Iran doesn't agree, we should just walk away. Let's continue our conversation now with Colonel Derek Harvey, a former intelligence officer and former advisor to General David Petraeus. He Skypes in from Tampa. Staying with us as well, Olga Villaverti, who is in our Newsmax TV newsroom. Colonel, President Obama announced yesterday that he's finally lifting the freeze on military aid to Egypt. How does Egypt play into this power struggle in the Middle East?
Well, very clearly, Egypt is very important to the strategic relationships in the area. They have a lot of military capability and political leadership that is important. They are aligned with Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, of course, and others in the Gulf, and they can provide naval capabilities, air capabilities, and ground forces to support, for example, operations in Yemen.
Now, Colonel, while all that is going on, House Speaker John Boehner is in Israel today and met with Prime Minister Netanyahu earlier. It seems the Republicans are trying to make amends with the Israeli leader. Now, how important, sir, is this visit to U.S.-Israeli relations and the region as a whole?
Well, I think it's incredibly important to maintain a strong and very visible relationship with Tel Aviv, regardless of who's in charge there. It's a key ally of ours in the region, and they have good relationships with a number of Arab states that are our allies too. I think it's important to build a coalition of Ankara, Cairo, Tel Aviv, and the Gulf monarchies to stand against Iranian aggression in the region.
And while you mentioned, for all intents and purposes, a pan-Islamic alliance against Iran, Colonel, we have the curious situation where there is a partisan divide on treatment with Israel, certainly from the Obama administration, dealing out of what seems to be a prolonged fit of pique personally between the president and the prime minister, as compared with the GOP leadership on Capitol Hill. I'm wondering the implications of the release of documents declassifying the fact that Israel is, for all intents and purposes, now a nuclear power. Did our government consciously provide the rationale for the Iranians to say, oh, well, there it is, plain and simple, we have a right to nuclear weapons?
Well, I think this is very childish of the administration. I think it was purposeful, it is petty, and it continues a trend by this administration of undermining friends and not focusing on working through issues and maintaining close, important relationships with our allies. At the end of the day, Tel Aviv is a friend and an ally, and they will be with us. Again, it's just petty.
And 2 minutes remaining in this segment, Colonel, that prompts this question. So the Iranians are saying they want nukes. We've heard the Saudi Arabians say that they want the same thing. Are we going to see nuclear arms proliferation and a nuclear arms race in the Middle East?
Well, we will if the current trend as outlined by the administration moves forward. The agreement looks like it's going to just provide a pathway, and the others nations in the region, Ankara, Riyadh, for example, will move forward. I think the administration has ignored some important things. The Iranian relationship with North Korea in developing military capabilities and nuclear capabilities in a clandestine way. They've ignored military developments, warhead developments, missile technology, and cruise missile development, all developed for the purpose of mating with nuclear weapons. We can't take these things and set them aside. They have to be part of a holistic agreement.
Colonel, earlier this week, we heard about an Iranian defector, one-time press aide to the current Iranian president, and now a journalist who said he had to quit being a journalist because he was told to report what the Iranian state wanted reported. He said the dynamic at work in these negotiations is the United States, in essence, speaking to the European powers on behalf of Iran. Do you believe that to be true, sir? 20 seconds.
I think there's some truth to that, and who would ever have thought that the French would have more cojones in these negotiations than the Americans? I think that says it all.
Well, that's almost a trilingual attempt there, the French with cojones, and we explained it in English. Colonel Derek Harvey, we appreciate the multiculturalism you bring. When we come back, beyond multiculturalism to a proliferation of problems. In all seriousness, we talked about nukes in the Middle East. There are plenty of other topics that occupy our attention, including the fate of our military veterans, their retirement plan, courtesy of our Commander-in-Chief. That's ahead here on America's Forum.